There's no doubt about it. Texas is the global standard when it comes to not only oil and gas production, but keeping regulations to a minimum, but also enforcing the right rules at the right time. As we continue into this election, we talked to the chairman of the Railroad Commission here in Texas, Christi Craddick.
In 1901, at Spindletop Hill near Beaumont, the future of Texas changed dramatically as, like a fountain of fortune, thousands of barrels of oil burst from the earth towards the sky. Soon, Detroit would be cranking out Model Ts by the millions, and America was on the move, thanks to the black gold being produced in Texas. Now, more than a century later, the vehicles are different, but nothing else has truly changed. Sure, there may be many other alternative energy sources like wind and solar and electric. But let's be honest, America depends on oil and entrepreneurs, and if the USA is truly going to be independent, it has to know the crude truth.
This episode is brought to you by LFS Chemistry. We are committed to being good stewards of the environment. We are providing the tools so you can be too. NAPE Expo, where deals happen. Air Compressor Solutions. When everything is on the line, Air Compressor Solutions is the dependable choice to keep commercial business powered up. Sandstone Group. Exec Crew. Elevate your network, elevate your knowledge. Texas Star Alliance. Pecos Country Operating. Fueling our future.
Well, hello again, and thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of The Crude Truth as I shoot today from our studios here in Austin, right overlooking the state capitol and the governor's mansion. It is no doubt about it that right now is a crucial time, and you've been hearing it everywhere, and you're going to hear it here again. This election is just so important. There are so many issues that need to be solved. There are so many leaders that we need to put in office or keep in office to only keep us moving strong and forward into 2025 and to continue into really 2100, which really is only 75 years away, y'all. But I digress on that part. And today I bring in somebody that knows what's going on because here in the oil and gas industry, it is crucial to not only be partners with the Railroad Commission, but also work with them in a way that helps the small operators out and also helps give them the big picture on things that are going on here in Texas. Because as I mentioned in our teaser, y'all, everybody comes to Texas to know how we're doing things and how we're regulating. And that means that we are setting the example and we set the proper example. So today I welcome Christi Craddick back on. Ma'am, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. And thank you for the time. You have been on a whirlwind really since, I don't know, the last 6 or 8 months with the campaign from the primaries, now the general election.
We have been.
And how's it going out there?
It's going well, and we're busy. About a month to the end, so we appreciate everybody who's helping us. We're traveling the state, listening to what's going on, and reminding people to vote.
Well, I think the most important thing there is you're listening to people and you're telling people to get out and vote. Right. What are you hearing out there right now? Because you've been all over, and for listeners out there that don't know, the state of Texas is huge. So to travel the state, that's no ordinary feat for anybody running for election. But what are you hearing out there?
Well, East Texas has different challenges than West, and I've been in both in the past week. So, and we love going all across the state. Look, I think West Texas and East Texas, South, and the whole state is very concerned about where the oil and gas industry could go with this next administration, depending on who wins in November. So people are concerned about that. But that being said, everybody is happy, I think, today with the Railroad Commission for the most part. We've got fair, consistent rules and regulations. They're innovating. And when you're making money and employing people, the industry is moving forward and continuing to create those jobs. I think that people have a lot of questions, though, what's going on in this industry. And like I said, I'm concerned about what Washington could do to us and as far as overregulation, which we're already seeing. Yeah. And want to make sure as we continue in Texas that they have opportunities. Again, it's about job creation. It's about opportunities for families. And where are those tax dollars going? Because people are concerned about their families generally. It costs more to eat. It costs more to fill up at the pump. Yeah. And they want to make sure that their families are taken care of. And the oil and gas industry has a job for them.
You mentioned there that, there's just so many different parts and how the economy really here in Texas only continues to thrive under oil and gas, and how this administration in Washington right now only continues to add on more regulations or continue to try to. Your office is I'll just ask the question rather than say, it's like, what are you guys doing to help fight off all these over-regulations there?
Well, we work a lot with the Attorney General's office. So we appreciate is suing this administration on several fronts. And so we hope that that's one way to stop some of this overregulation. But the other piece really is, as an agency, we want to have fair, consistent rules, regulations, but we also want best practices. So we have about 4 rulemakings going on right now. We want to make sure our rules are up to date on all fronts. And we think that makes industry continue to do the right thing, and which I think they want to do. Gives them opportunities to continue to clean up the environment. We want to make sure we've got good inspectors and people working at this agency. Our biggest challenge has always been that industry goes and hires them. So because we have good people who work for us, and making sure we've got enough resources for our agency. And so I think you said we were in Austin, and legislative session's coming. So we are working on our budget for next session, and we want to make sure we're prioritizing keeping good people, continuing our IT upgrade, which we're almost done with, and getting more dollars for well plugging, because that's a priority for this agency as well. So those are issues we're already working on with the legislature.
Well, first of all, the IT thing as a whole, I think, is still moving forward great. We've talked about it before, and congratulations on getting close to done. I just know in any industry, in any company, upgrading your IT, it's always going to be, I'm sure y'all have a party when y'all are done with that.
We're almost done. So we are going back in this session. The last big tranches are UIC, which is disposal wells, and that part of our sector, as well as alternative fuels. We've got a few parts to finish, but this is our last big ask this session, and we're expanding that. Because of what's going on in the industry, we've got a lot more water issues all over the state. We're going to make sure that we expand our IT project while we're building it, so we don't have to go back and it costs less when you're doing it when you build. So we're going to ask so we can collect more data and have more information available for everybody.
The other thing you mentioned a minute ago was about receiving more money for orphan wells. And I think we've discussed it before, but you do have a whole department for orphan wells and ways that y'all, I guess I'll just say it like this, y'all give money to other companies to go plug wells year round. And I'm just saying it kind of in an easy, lackadaisical way, but can you talk about that real quick? And then I want to follow up with another question about more money.
Sure. So orphan wells are important for us to manage. Back in 2000, and I've talked about this, I think, before, the state decided to put a fund in place. So we have orphaned abandoned wells, meaning somebody's gone out of business. We can't find them. And we need to clean up. We want to continue to clean up issues and particularly plug these wells. We as an agency today have about 8,000 on our books. That number seems to be stagnant. We do plug a lot of wells, but then more come on. And that's not unusual, whether it's small or large operators, just things happen. And so we go out and inspect those wells once they come into our portfolio. And most of these wells are old. Right. And when I say old, more than 20, 30 years old, mostly vertical wells too. Not many horizontal wells. It's old stuff. Yeah. And we didn't have a bonding program when these wells were drilled. So we have the legislature's been giving us additional dollars. We also use fees from the industry. And today, if in the last 20 years, we do go get a bond, and we use that as an insurance policy as well. So we go inspect those wells. We prioritize them. If they've got an environmental problem, they go to the top of the list. If they're one that we don't see that could cause an environmental problem or that has a leak, for instance, they're on the list. And so we go out and you mentioned we do have companies. We go out and bid like everybody else does in the state. We go out and bid and have contracts, and we do what we call a managed contract. So we don't go plug just one well most of the time. We go plug, 10 or 12. saves the state a little money, saves everybody a little bit of money because you have to move a rig once onto a piece of property, right? Instead of moving it all over. So this last year, we plugged about 1,000 wells. That's been our goal for the last several years. And so we continue to plug wells. And that's an important piece of what we do to try to continue to make sure the environment stays clean.
Now, with all that being said, you also mentioned trying to receive more money
That's right.
for plugging orphan wells. How much money are y'all looking to get from the state? And are there any chances that we could actually get some from this Inflation Reduction Act?
So we have two pots of money today. So I'm going to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act first because it's, there's never an easy federal program. Right. So we as an agency, when the IIJA was being proposed in DC, we're almost 3 years in, we were asked how many orphan wells we had. And remember, it isn't just onshore wells. We also have all the abandoned orphan wells that are in the bay that GLO permitted, which today is about 153. And those cost a lot. Yeah. It's about $1 million a well is our estimate because you have to build a platform, you have to have specialized crews. Yeah. So those usually cost more than onshore. So we said to the federal government, we have about 8,000 wells, and our estimate 3.5 years ago or 3 years ago was that it cost us $330 million to plug everything on our books at the time. Okay. Now, obviously, life has moved and we've plugged some wells, but we still have about 8,000. About 2 years ago, after the law was passed, states who applied got $25 million in unrestricted dollars, meaning no programmatic. And I say that very specifically in a second. Yes. I'll explain why. And we took those dollars and plugged about an additional 730 wells in the state. Then about a year ago, the Department of Interior put out rules about what the next group of money, and here becomes the program, right? So we all agreed as states, IOGCC, lots of comments were made. And last August, we all agreed that, okay, we can live with these. They aren't perfect, but we can live with how this program's going to work and fine. So we as a state were the first state in to apply for federal dollars under the new program. And February 1st, we had $78 million show up at my agency, almost $79 million. Except, and this is where I go back, the federal government's never easy to work with. And on January 15th, they came back and said, we're adding some more things that you have to do. So the new 3 things that we'd all agreed. Now we have to go get Native American tribes to agree before we can start a well plugging project, which in Texas, we don't really have relationships with very many of those tribes. Right. So the federal government's supposed to help us. 2, we have to go to the Historical Commission of the state, which we work well with the Historical Commission, and they have to approve the projects. And 3, and everybody, because they've been watching your show, will understand this, we have to go get U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to approve our projects. And they have a minimum 45 days to approve something, which means it's very slow. So unfortunately, we had 60 projects shovel ready to go. We planned, we were ready to go, and we're off 60%. They are very slow to permit. It's very onerous to get through the program. And that's unfortunate. Look, it's your tax dollars, it's mine. It was passed, and we've talked to the congressmen and women who passed this and had good intentions. Department of Interior has created a program instead of a pass-through, and that was not the intent, but getting Congress to kind of do anything is a challenge. So we are working through that program and trying to use dollars appropriately because it's my tax dollars and yours, so we ought to use it. One pot of money.
Yes.
The other pot is state dollars. So we got an additional, 8 years ago, we started getting additional dollars into this agency to plug more wells. Hence, we got to about 1,000 a year. And it's been roughly $22 to $23 million a year that we've gotten. Well, costs have gone up. So we have not gone back and asked for an increase in our cost. And so it's caused, we were 8 years ago, average about $15,000 a well to plug. Today, it's to $45,000 a well, depending on where you are. That's the average cost.
Yes.
So we need an increase of dollars because of that. But two, and everybody reads about them, we've had some emergency wells in the state. And frankly, you might read about it in one part of the state, but it's all over. We have emergency issues. We've got a lot of drilling going on in the state.
Yes.
There are issues that are popping up all over. And so we've been spending additional dollars, not out of the well plugging, but just out of the agency. And so we don't have any more money. We want to fully fund the program that we need to.
Yeah.
And so we're going to ask for additional dollars. And we really think, look, there's a lot of rainy day money, which is severance tax dollars.
Yes.
We ought to have access to some of that to work and make sure the agency can do its job well in well plugging. So that's a long answer to your question.
Well, no, but I'm glad you were able to put it in two different pots. And let's go back to the federal dollars. I think it's hilarious that they literally give you the money and then say, oh, by the way, here's new
by the way,
stipulations.
2 weeks out.
Yeah, 2 weeks
That's
out.
right.
And
Lawyers got involved, if that tells you what happened.
well, I mean,
And I am one, but I didn't tell you lawyers got involved.
well, I know you mentioned the Native Americans, and in Oklahoma, it's big. It's a very big part of it. I know. I remember growing up when my dad was still doing the more software side, and you're doing royalty checks. I mean, you would have a thick stack of checks that all went out to all the Native Americans.
That's right, and
so
it's
you work
important.
close, right?
Right.
But here in Texas, I can't. Now, granted, it's me, so it's not like like I'm taking this to the bank. But I can't think of any place that we're drilling on Native American land anywhere.
We don't really have that many in Texas,
Okay.
and so but then we have to go back and look at where the historic Native American tribes could have been, so we make sure it's Native American tribes are really important. There's no question about that. DC, it's a back to Washington, DC, one size doesn't fit all regulations. And that's where this is. And that doesn't make, it's unfortunate because it doesn't make a lot of sense. You're right, in Texas, like it would in Oklahoma or New Mexico.
Yeah.
They have more Native American tribes. You ought to be respectful of working with the landowners, the surface owners, which I think we are anyway.
Yeah.
But we can't readily identify a lot of Native American tribes. However, we still have to go through that. The bigger challenge is really U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They don't do anything easy. They're a big agency, part of an agency, and frankly, they don't have enough people. And that's a real challenge for them. And I will say, Department of Interior, the woman who's running, and there's one woman running the program at this point for the entire country. She's been very fair to us in trying to work with us, but they need more than one person to run a program. So we're working on federal dollars, but that being said, state dollars are still really important to us. We want to make sure we have enough dollars to plug appropriately, and emergency wells have become a bigger part of our portfolio than we anticipated a few years ago. So that's why we're going to ask for an additional almost $75 million to put into our well plugging program in the next couple of years to make sure that we can plug not just emergency wells, but that we can continue to meet those metrics because costs have gone up.
Well, before I move on to the next question, do you see any opposition to that? And
we'll just see what the legislature decides.
Okay.
Everybody's over asking for money. That's part of it. But I think probably we hope the industry usually is for our ask. And I think generally the environmental community wants us to continue to plug wells, and landowners as well. So I don't know that we'll have opposition. It's whether they've already dedicated dollars someplace else.
I want to highlight, stay on the orphan well topic. And you say that y'all have had about 8,000 wells a year and it's been stagnant. I do want to at least highlight that, hey, y'all are plugging about 1,000 wells a year. And then about more come on to the orphan list every year. So, it's not stagnant, but it is. So I want to say, hey, the program's working. Okay.
Well, and I was going to say, remember, we plug a lot of, the industry overall plugs a lot of wells in this state.
Yes.
The industry plugs about 95% of the wells that are plugged in this state. We've got a lot of wells in the state. Historically, we've drilled industry's drilled, we've permitted about 1.5 million wells, right? Yeah. So our orphan abandoned well program is what everybody else in the country and actually Canada aspires to be. Yes. So we had a conversation a couple of years ago with the Canadians in Alberta area, and I guess during COVID, or right sometime during COVID, they had 400,000 wells that needed to be plugged up there.
Wow.
That's a crazy number. I don't even know how you approach it, right? But so Texas really, an industry plugs most of the wells. They're not orphaned, abandoned, but they need to be plugged.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that people recognize we need to be plugging wells. We need to plug them appropriately. And at some point, economics or just they're old, they aren't going to come back online. So we need to clean up the environment and clean it up.
Let me ask you this. In order to maybe get some of these wells off that orphan list, how do you guys, I guess the word incentivize operators to go pick up some of these other leases where maybe there might be one good well, but it's considered a plugging liability? How do you guys, are there some ways to encourage us to go buy and pick up these older leases to not only plug the wells, but then also put wells online? Like, are there some ways that you guys can help us, encourage us to pick those up?
Well, the legislature's coming in, so I think it's a nice time to try to get some incentives from them. Look, for things like enhanced oil recovery, we do have incentives. We do see companies doing enhanced oil recovery, meaning they're using water, or the new thing is CO2. And I say new, it's 20 years old in the state, but everybody sees an opportunity with CO2. That's what we want to use too. So we see some of these older wells are being used in enhanced oil recovery, whether it's water floods or CO2 floods. And look, there's some opportunity potentially. We're hearing conversations about companies plugging wells and getting CO2 credit on the open market. We can't, as an agency, plug a well and get CO2 credit, but industry can. So I think that's an opportunity as well. And if you've got good rocks mean somebody is going to go pick up those leases. They may have to plug to remediate some stuff, and then they go drill or remediate and reopen those wells. So I think there's opportunities, but we do require you, as you're coming in, you can't just pick one well off a lease. You take the whole thing.
You take the whole thing.
You take the whole thing.
That's correct.
Because look, it's you can't cherry pick exactly. We want you, if you're going to take responsibility for that lease and go lease it up, then you get everything. So, so we're willing to have those conversations and continue conversations about how we keep some of these older wells online, because it's small operators.
Yeah.
And once you've plugged a well, it's hard to go back down and find those resources again. And it's tax dollars and jobs that go away too.
No, and then you mentioned, the small operators. A small operator is somebody that, does probably 200 barrels of oil a day or less.
I don't know that we have. I think we've got 100 to 200 barrels. That's probably fair.
And so these guys are almost one-stop shops, and they're probably not only drilling their own wells to some degree, but they're also reworking the wells themselves.
Right.
Very hands-on, and still having to do all the paperwork on the back end.
That's right.
So I know that, especially in all these smaller communities, you get these almost lease swaps a lot. And so everybody's like, oh, well, that's a plugging liability. So that's why I ask you those questions, because for the big companies to go, oh, okay, we're going to have to set aside this much money. Kind of like we were talking about in our pre-meeting. It was like, I was looking at some leases. It's like, we knew we were going to have these wells to plug. It's like, okay, so that's X amount of dollars that we're never going to get back, so to speak. And I use quotations for all my listeners out there because, that's money that went down a hole that you don't get back. Because obviously the whole point to drilling oil wells is put money down the hole and the money comes back up.
That's true.
But, just being able to encourage us to do more, because there are so many wells. Like, I'll share this also. I think not only is there 8,000 orphan wells, but we have numerous idle wells that each company has on their books.
That's right.
That to me would be one, another thing there. But anyway,
about 150,000 inactive wells in the state today is what we have what we have listed. So, and look, today industry has an opportunity to continue to test those wells, and we don't consider those orphaned or abandoned. They really are on somebody's books, and but some of those wells, industry I think is beginning to slowly plug some of those wells too. Yes. We probably ought to have a more aggressive program at some point. Some of those wells will never come back online, and maybe some of them will. I think there's always opportunity to remediate a well and work it and rework it, but at some point, it costs more to rework a well than it does to plug it and try and drill a new
Drill
one.
no, yeah. And I've ran into that, and I'm sure other operators have too. Every now and
That's
then,
right.
like you go back and look at the bill, like I think I could have done a new well for this.
That's right.
I want to talk about West Texas. As far as I'm concerned, that is the biggest oil field in the world. All right, we're in Texas, so I'm going to say that, and I'll stay by that. And if OPEC was right here, I'd say you're second.
I think that's fair.
Okay.
I think that's fair.
But, with as much production right now as we have in America, right now, as I like to say whenever I get the opportunity to do an interview, we've opened up the spigots in West Texas. We kind of just turned the faucet on a little bit more full blast. We're not drilling as many wells, but we're producing more oil right now than we ever have, which is also causing possibly some issues out there right now. And, that was something I wanted to talk to you about, is just all that's going on out in West Texas. And first of all, let's just highlight the good in West Texas, what's going on. Then we can talk about some of the negatives that are going.
So you're right. West Texas is the most productive, and I say the Permian Basin, the biggest oil field in the world and the most productive, which means there's a lot going on. Yeah. And there's a lot of jobs out there, although you're right, we're not drilling the number of wells and don't have the number of rigs running because industry's innovative and gotten smart. Mm-hmm. And so they need fewer wells because of horizontal wells. The innovation is now we're averaging 2 miles of a horizontal well instead of a mile like we were a few years ago. They're recycling a lot of water. I joke that we could almost have East Texas and West Texas look the same and have a lot of green out in West Texas with the volume of water that we have in West Texas, produced water that's coming up. But people are being smarter about what's going on with water, and we appreciate it. And we think there's some more opportunity to come, that they are looking at what beneficial use looks like putting on crops, for instance, as an example, besides just recycling it and reusing it. So we're excited about watching industry do some really smart things. And again, I think they're able to do it because our rules and regulations are consistent. They also come talk to us and say, we're heading down this road. Will you work with us so we can get there? And we let them test some things too, because we want that innovation. I think that's how this industry continues to thrive. Yeah. So that's a real positive. And you're right, it's with the biggest oil field, you've got some challenges. And so what are the challenges that we deal with and the industry's dealing with? One, seismic issues. Mm-hmm. And two, produced water is a challenge. I say you're not in the oil and gas industry, you're in the fluids industry.
Amen to that. Yes, ma'am.
And because water's a piece of it. You've got and waste. You've got to figure out what to do with that part too. So as an agency, look, we put inspectors out anytime there's stuff going on. They're in double time, I feel like. Yeah. And these are good folks that are working to see what the issues may be and if we can identify where a seismic activity happened, right? We've worked with industry. We're working with Bureau of Economic Geology, and Texas Tech has got a water consortium that they're leading. Everybody's looking for good solutions to some of these issues. And we get landowners involved. I mean, there's a lot of groups involved that are giving good feedback. I was in both East Texas and West Texas, like I mentioned, and I go ask the smart geologists and engineers that I visit with and say, okay, these are some issues we've got going on water. What do you see? What do you suggest? And they're working to give us some other solutions besides what we're working through as well. Yeah. We've got great people at my agency. We can always hire a few smart people to give them some help, by the way. Yeah. And I don't know that anybody anticipated, not just today, because it's not just in West Texas, although that is where we're all focused today. Yes. But we've got some challenges all over the state. And like I said, I think industry wants to be a good operator. Landowners want to know what's going on. And so we as an agency are trying to communicate and have inspectors out there to work with people to figure that out.
Well, you talk about like everything that's going on out there. I want to just kind of talk about how you guys and how y'all respond to situations. Because you mentioned earlier that you've got the Orphan Well Fund that y'all even use it for emergencies on orphan wells.
That's right.
Here in the last couple of weeks, there was a big blowout out in West Texas. What did you guys do to let's walk through that. Like, you hear about this big blowout. how does the Railroad Commission spring into action? Because that's a well, that's an orphan well. So how do y'all spring into action?
Actually, the blowout well is not an orphan well.
Oh.
We identify. So first and foremost, we get an inspector on site,
Okay.
whoever from the field. So that would be the Midland Field Office from where we're talking about. We inspect it. We start identifying if we can identify who has ownership of a well.
Mm-hmm.
We identified, and the company that drilled that well came in and said, we think it's ours, and we're going to work to remediate that. So first and foremost is, you've got so much water coming up, and that's what several of these are. Let's figure out who can haul water off. Let's start identifying where the well is. Let's make sure we know where the well bore is, and who are the appropriate people to get companies. We need to go hire people to get involved. So we're on site most of the time. We've had a couple of people from Austin have been out there. I've been out in West Texas for almost a month, back and forth, just because between managing people and making sure we're identifying how to resolve some issues, getting real solutions is important. You don't want to just plug something so you have a problem. Again, you want to do it right and do it well.
Right.
And look, not all these wells were plugged. Some of them weren't plugged. They're just holes out there that water found a place and it came up. So those are challenges that we're, again, working through as an agency. We are in the process of updating our IT, and like I said, the last part is UIC, which is underground injection wells.
Mm-hmm.
We want to make sure that as we build that system, or saltwater disposal wells, we use it interchangeably for us, right?
Yeah.
We want to make sure that we are gathering more data. So if we see an issue or there's an issue, we can go back and say, all right, this area pressured up. Because we know that from data that people gave us when they were permitting and continuing to drill the well. So being more proactive, we're working through that. And also part of that is for us identifying the wells that we need to prioritize to plug now. So we've done numbers for a long time.
Yeah.
Now, in the last 6 months, we really have recognized and are shifting our priority to just straight 1,000 wells numbers to saying, all right, we've got some environmental challenges in this area.
Mm-hmm.
We may have an H2S well we need to prioritize based on environmental risk better than we have in the past, and not worry about hitting 1,000 wells, although I still want to get there, but let's prioritize the environmental risks. And so we're working through some of those reprioritizations and looking how that works. And that's part of some of this, but we've got emergency wells. And so we've already spent $10 million on one this year. And that's a lot of money for an agency that, like I said, only has $23 million to spend. So it's going and educating the legislature is our biggest challenge, I think, for them to understand we've got a lot of water. The pore space is full, and we're active in a lot of spots. And nobody anticipated this 5 years ago, but this is where we are, and we need to make sure we're addressing the issues in real time.
Yeah. Christi, excuse me, Chairman Craddick, I want to ask you this, because listening to you and hearing all the things that you were involved in, you're in another fight again to campaign to do this again,
right?
And you've done this before, meaning this is not your first seeking your first reelection. What is it that continues to motivate you to want to do this and only see things grow? Because before I let you answer, it's like we've only seen positive things happen. I do think that the three that are in there have been very instrumental. A lot of positive changes. Yes, as we know, behind the scenes, I'll sit here and I'll say, hey, here's what's going on, and complain.
Good. I want to hear the complaints too.
I know you do. I know you do. And I share them with you, but it's like, what makes you want to continue to do this again, to hear these complaints? Because mine are at least halfway decent. I can only imagine other individuals, but it's like, why is it you want to go again? Why do you want to go for another round?
Thanks for the question, because look, I ran for the Railroad Commission, not because of politics, but because I really wanted to get to the agency and make some changes. IT being a big piece. I keep talking about it, but it's been huge for us. We were hard copy and hard copy filing, and you had to come to the library. We're now We still have a library that's old stuff, but we're basically everything's digitized or will be. And that's a big piece for us for, it's been transformational for this industry.
I agree.
And we're more transparent, and it's been allowed us to do better with fewer people, I think, longer term. So that's been a big piece. But because I think this is a good industry, I think it's the most important industry and the most important agency in the state. And so I like being at the Railroad Commission. I actually like the people at the agency. We have really good people at the agency. They're all nice. They're all trying to do the right thing by the state. They all work hard. But I also think this industry is really important when you look at not just where we are in Texas, that it's a third of the state's economy, and puts in about $25 billion into the state every year in tax dollars and other dollars. That's a lot of money. But you've also got about 480,000 people who work directly in this industry and with an average salary of $125,000. That's real money in people's pockets. So you want to make sure that we as an agency don't mess it up, and we continue to allow those jobs to be created and innovation to happen. And in today's environment with the federal government, you've got a group of people who don't like the oil and gas industry, don't appreciate it, and would like for it to go away, which is not realistic and not common sense. Hopefully we get a change in November, but whether we do or we don't, I want to continue to make sure as an agency, I think we need people who've been there, that we have knowledge about what's going on, because again, this is a dynamic industry, and I think I've got some good experience over there, but you also need people who are going to push back and explain why the federal government shouldn't be in, why it should be state regulated, how important this industry is, not just to the state, and I mentioned how important it is to the state, but we look at nationally and frankly, internationally, we're shipping LNG all over the world. That's important. National security is important. If Texas is strong and our energy is strong, then so is everybody else around the world. And I think that's really a priority for me to make sure that we continue in Texas to be a leader.
Well, I just cannot thank you enough. Since this is a campaign season, if there's anything else you'd like to share, on why they should vote for you, please please give the panel, the floor is yours for one more.
Well, thanks.
For another minute.
Look, I think it's important to get out and vote, number one. So please vote this cycle. I'm number 4 on the ballot. We've made it through a primary, and we do have a general election. And I hope people aren't apathetic or just stay at home, because this is an important election cycle, not just for this race, especially for this race, but across the country, where this country goes and the policies that are being created across the world, across the country. That's today. And so, look, I believe in freedom of choice, and that we ought to be able to have a little bit of everything, because we've got windmills too in this state. I don't have an issue with that. But natural gas is really, and the production of natural gas and moving it all over the world, that's a priority. We shouldn't have shut down LNG terminal permitting. That's a policy decision that Washington, D.C. and this administration made without any knowledge of what's going on. So I look forward to continue educating people about how important this industry is, but also just, again, fair, consistent rules and regulations allow Texas to be a leader. And we want to make sure that we have best practices and continue to lead.
Well, Chairman Craddick, I cannot thank you enough for coming on.
Me.
Thank you so much for the time. Again, you've been all over the state, and it's not done yet. So good luck here for the rest of the campaign, and we'll hope to see you here again later in November.
Great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And to all our listeners out there, if you got any questions about what the Railroad Commission does, or how they help out every day, please reach out to me. If you got any questions on orphan wells and how we only continue to plug those, let me know. But as always, I want to thank you all for listening, and we'll see you again on another episode of The Crude Truth.
Again, The Crude Truth would like to thank today's sponsors: LFS Chemistry, NAPE Expo, Air Compressor Solutions, Sandstone Group, Exec Crew, Texas Star Alliance, Pecos Country Operating, and Real News Communication Network.
The easiest way to start your own podcast and TV show? Real News Communications Network. Stand out from your competition. Produce streams of high-quality social media content. Become a thought leader in your industry. With RNCN, you get to be the host. We handle everything else. Tour one of our 3 locations in Dallas, Fort Worth, and the Colony. Call 972-402-6333 or visit launchashow.com to find out more.